Our topic is Untangling Jerusalem's Aqueducts. Let me share my screen. Wait a minute. Judy, you need to let me share my screen. There must be some setting because it's telling me host disabled participant screen sharing.
Just a second. I'm trying to figure that out. Just give me a second.
Yeah, I can't tell you what it is, but it must be there somewhere.
All right. Try it now.
Well, you shared your screen.
That's not good. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, you're good.
Yes, I am. Where is it? Okay, people can hopefully see that. Okay, we're going to talk about the aqueduct system, which is sort of a tangled mess. And the point of this diagram I have on the right-hand side of the screen is mostly to show you what a tangled mess is. Hopefully, by the end of this lecture, everything will be clear. My sources of information are a lot of tooling around in the Shetach and a lot of reading. There are several good books on the topic of aqueducts. Probably the best one of all is the book by Amichai Mazar, which was printed in around 2002, I think. Then there are much more recent articles. There are numerous excavations that have been done. The best article of all that I think is by Shimon Gibson and David Amit. It was published in English about 6 months after David Amit died. And in the article, Shimon Gibson thanks his co-author, who unfortunately is no longer around. Here's a overview of the aqueduct system that breaks it up into 6 components. There are 2 aqueducts that lead from Solomon's pools to Jerusalem. Solomon's pools are, as it were, the heart of the aqueduct system. And just as there are 2 aqueducts that lead from the pools to Jerusalem, there are 2 other aqueducts that lead to Solomon's pools from various springs. And this is all color coded. So the sort of turquoise blue is the lower aqueduct, the purple is the upper aqueduct, and so on. I hope that's all clear. By the way, this diagram, all the pictures I'm showing you are lifted from various articles and things. This particular diagram was lifted from a book that I wrote about water systems. Then there are 2 other aqueducts. Besides the 2 plus 2, there are 2 other aqueducts that are sort of separate. One goes from Solomon's pools, they're in the center, off to the side. It's not shown on the screen, on the diagram, to Herodian. And then there's another aqueduct, which we'll talk about toward the end, which connects the Mamila pool to the Hezekiah's pool. And the truth is, I really shouldn't have listed that as a 6th entry, because most scholars believe that it's actually part of the upper aqueduct system. Here's a schematic view of the whole diagram, of the whole aqueduct system that I really like. This is lifted from Amichai Mazar's book on aqueducts in Israel. And here you can clearly see the 4 aqueducts that I was telling you, the 4 main aqueducts I was telling you about. The 2 dotted lines, the 2 dotted aqueducts show aqueducts going from the pools of Solomon, which I'll talk about in just a moment, to Jerusalem, the lower level aqueduct and the upper level aqueduct. And he's got all the numbers here, which are very important to understand the system, the numbers being the elevation above sea level. And the 2 solid lines are the aqueducts that feed Solomon's pools. And each of them is fed by several springs, which are the black dots here. This chart of numbers I find really fascinating. It's got really cool stuff. This to give you the feel of it. It says here the lower aqueduct, which is the bottom line. Oh, I guess that's why they put it there. The bottom line is the lower aqueduct. That's this line here. Oh, hold it. Let's see if I can get a. Here, yeah, the lower aqueduct. Okay, is there. So this line, this shows you that the length of the aqueduct is 21 kilometers, which makes it the second longest of the let's say the second longest of the four. But its straight line distance is only 10 kilometers. In other words, it took them more than double. It took them 21 kilometers to convey the water only a straight line distance of 10 kilometers. And the slope is 1.4%, which is just, in my opinion, amazing. A few basic principles. As you will know, water does not flow uphill unless you have an electric pump. And there are no electric pumps these days. The water won't even flow if it's flat. It has to go downhill. Gravity is the only source of locomotion for the water. A corollary of that is the fact that the water source must be higher than the destination. And when the water source is far away, you sort of scratch your head and say, how did they know 2,000 years ago that some spring between Hebron and Beit Lechem is actually higher than where they wanted to get the water to, which was Arrub? But they figured that out. Another corollary is that because the water has to be going downhill, there's a certain minimal rate of descent. It can't go down at a rate of 1 centimeter per kilometer. The water just won't flow. There has to be some rate of descent. And if I go back to the diagram, the schematic for a minute, you can see the percentages. This one was really steep, 19%, but it's also very short. The lower aqueduct, as I said, was 1.4%. Look at this one here. The Arrub aqueduct, which we'll talk about later, is only 0.9%. That was a real technical challenge. It was a real engineering accomplishment. Now, if you're trying to get water from point A to point B and have it flow downhill the whole way, if there's a hill in the middle, that's bad. I mean, how does the water get around the hill or get past the hill? Well, you can go around it, but if you go around it, it makes the aqueduct longer. And if you make the aqueduct longer, because of the previous corollary, you need a certain minimal rate of descent, you're going to lose height. And if your goal is to get the water from some spring between Beit Lechem and Hebron to Arbit, if you go around some very large mountain, you might lose so much height that you won't make it. An alternative is to go through the mountain. And going through a mountain is a lot of work. You have to hack your way through the rock. But not only is it hard work, it's very difficult because first of all, it's going to take a long time. It's going to totally destroy any schedule you're trying to keep. And you might try to speed things up by having teams work from two ends of the mountain and get through the mountain twice as fast that way. The problem is, how are the two teams going to meet? We'll talk about that later. Valleys are also bad. If you have a valley in your way, you can go around it. Again, that makes the aqueduct longer. I'm sure those of you who are familiar with the aqueduct system can probably cite an example right now of a place where the aqueduct goes around a valley. If not, we'll talk about it later. Another alternative is to go over a bridge. That's very difficult to do, especially if the valley is deep. You might need a really high bridge to go over the valley because you can't have the water flow down one side of the valley and then magically be transported up the hill on the other side. Wait a minute. Is that really true? There's such a thing called an inverted siphon. An inverted siphon, I'll explain it later, but it is a way of getting across a valley It's technically very difficult to do. The maintenance is very difficult, but it was done. We'll talk about it later. One important word is specus, specus. The specus is actually a Latin word for the channel through which the water flows. So the aqueduct systems all have a specus, and sometimes it's built on top of the wall, and sometimes it's through a tunnel in the ground, but it always consists of a sort of rectangular channel, which is plastered and plastered and plastered to make it waterproof. And if it's not underground, there's flat stones that create a roof to keep out the creepies and crawlies. Another important point of background is the Romans used way more water per capita than we do in modern times. Now, that is not an obvious fact. You would say, well, look, we have showers and we take baths. People take showers 3 times a day. We do all this stuff. But you know what? The Romans had a completely different way of doing things. And the difference really, I think, is all in toilets. When we use our toilets, we flush the toilet and water comes down and washes all the stuff down into the sewer system. The Romans didn't do it that way. In a Roman latrine, the water came from an aqueduct or a stream and was constantly flowing all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So that alone explains how they use way more water than we do. Another important background point is that the sources of water to Jerusalem without the aqueducts, namely Gihon Spring, cisterns starting from the point when waterproof plaster was developed, and capturing rainwater, those 3 things combined are really not enough for Second Temple period Jerusalem. There's not a huge amount of rain. There are no springs other than Gihon Spring, and there had to be a solution. The heart of the aqueduct system is Solomon's pools. Solomon's pools have nothing to do with Solomon. It's just a name. The name comes from a pasuk in Echa. Asiti li brechot mayim lahashkot mehem ya'ar tzomeach etzim. I built myself a pool of water to irrigate from it a forest of trees. Now, Solomon might have done some kind of pools of water. In fact, I'm pretty sure I know where he did, and he even built something vaguely resembling an aqueduct, but he did not build Solomon's pools. Solomon's pools are much later. They date to around the time of King Herod, with various additions, improvements, and modifications. The 3 pools, as you can see clearly in this photograph, the upper, the middle, and the lower. The upper pool is 800 meters above sea level. The middle pool is 785, and the lower pool is 765. They're actually carefully arranged. The floor of the upper pool is exactly at the level of the top of the middle pool. And the floor of the middle pool is exactly at the level of the top of the lower pool. So you could actually, in theory, you could completely empty one pool into the other. Together, the 3 pools hold a vast quantity of water, 250,000 cubic meters. The input to the pools are from springs. The upper pool, that one there, is fed by an aqueduct called the BR aqueduct, one of the 4 I mentioned. And it's also fed by 2 springs. By the way, the BR aqueduct supplies 25% of the input to the Solomon pool system. The middle pool is fed by the Arrub aqueduct. That's the second to the 2 aqueducts that leads to Solomon's pools. That's larger. That provides 63% of the total. And the remaining 12% comes from springs, not from the 2 aqueducts. You can't really see in a diagram, but in the trees there's the remains of a British pumping station that was built in the very early 1900s, right after the British conquered the area, and they pumped water from Solomon's Pools to Jerusalem and put the ancient aqueduct system out of use for the first time in over 2,000 years. Only the two upper pools are ancient. The third pool was only built by the Mamelukes. It was built by Kait Bey in 1483. Now, I said that the name Solomon's Pools is completely bogus, but you know what? It's actually true. Why? Because all three pools were rebuilt by our friend Suleiman the Great. And Suleiman is Solomon, okay? So they're Solomon's Pools. Moving on. Oh, sorry, here's a diagram of the Solomon's Pools system. You have the upper pool, the middle pool, the lower pool. This is very complicated. This diagram is from Amichai Mazar, of course. It took a really long time for him to work this all out. Here you can see there's a spring here called Ein Salach and another spring called Ein Burak. These two springs flow into the upper pool. The upper pool is also fed by the BR aqueduct, which comes in from the south. The middle pool is fed by the Arrub aqueduct. Notice the question mark here. Even this is all not completely clear. And the southern pool, well, it sort of gets, it's not really clear to me how the lower pool works. The lower aqueduct is this line here. So it sort of starts from the middle pool, but it also has water flowing into it from the lower pool. So you can see conflicting sources. Some people say it starts from here, and some people say it starts from here. There's a spring called Ein Tam, which feeds into the system also, and it seems likely that the lower aqueduct, when it was first built, which was before any of these pools existed, it took water directly from Ein Tan or Ein Tam, either way, M or an N, whichever you prefer. It took that water to Jerusalem, and only later were there pools built to allow water to collect and bring in water from other places. Onto the lower aqueduct. The lower aqueduct is the oldest aqueduct. The water, as I said just now, came from Ein Tam, and it fed the lower pool, and it's at the same level of the start of the aqueduct, the lower aqueduct. As I already said, this lower aqueduct is 21 kilometers long, and it took 21 kilometers to go only 10 kilometers. The goal was the Temple Mount at 735 meters above sea level, which means that it's got exactly 30 meters to work with. It's got 765 to 735. And that is an amazing challenge, because if it was a straight line flat surface, okay, fine. It's not that big. 30 kilometers, you have 30 meters to work with, but it's not a straight line. You're going around mountains and valleys and stuff. It's very complicated. Here, let me let me show you. How do I do this? I want to show you the diagram. Can you see that? Can you see the new diagram? Oh, I see. What I have to do is stop share, and then do share again. And there. Now you can see that diagram? Okay.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, this is a detailed diagram of the aqueduct system lifted from Shimon Gibson's article. he copied it from Amichai Mazar's article. So if you want to know what the numbers stand for, you have to go to Amichai Mazar's article. But Shimon Gibson translated it into English, and since this forum is in English, I thought this would be great. It's also newer and more updated. So we've been talking right now about the lower aqueduct. The lower here are the Solomon's pools. The lower aqueduct is this solid black line. It goes like this. And you can see it's very twisty and turny. That's why it takes 21 meters. Oops. When the aqueduct gets to Beit Lechem, there was a problem. There was a problem to get from, let's say here, number 32. Wait, I lost my pointer. Got it. Okay, to get from 32 to 37 is tricky because there's hills and valleys. On this side, okay, this is Beit Lechem, and on this side of town, there's a large valley that goes out this way, but it goes up, the ground goes uphill very steeply, and over here, there's a ridge. When they built the lower aqueduct, they decided to go through that ridge, which, as I said before, is tricky. It means that you've got to do a lot of carving rock, and you have to do a tunnel, and it has to be straight, it has to be at the right level. And so there was a tunnel under Beit Lechem, and it worked. That tunnel, let me see, I have here my notes. 1 second. It saved a huge amount of distance. It saved something like 1.5 kilometers of aqueduct. Yeah, it saved 1.5 kilometers. It was this, the fact that they went through this mountain instead of going in a straight line made instead of going around, if they had gone around the mountain, the aqueduct would have been 1.5 kilometers longer. The aqueduct continues north, approaching Jerusalem. It goes past Tantur. Here's the Mar Elias Monastery. It goes around to the east of Mar Elias. And then it goes by around Ramat Rachel out towards Sur Bachar. It passes the Diplomat Hotel. On the slope below the hotel, there have been various excavations where they found the lower aqueduct. In one place, they found 6 different stages of construction. In other words, the aqueduct was built, and then it was rebuilt, and then it was rebuilt, and then it was rebuilt again and again because it's a water fixture and it springs leaks, and they want to improve it and try to make the water flow faster. If the slope is too slow, the water will barely dribble out of the end, and that's bad if you've got a lot of people, a lot of thirsty people in Jerusalem. So they would try to fix it, make the water flow faster. The aqueduct continues through Talpiot Mizrach. Somewhere in here, and I don't know exactly where, around 55, there's a tunnel that's 40 meters long. In one place, the archaeologist said that there were 9 layers of plaster on the spekus. The aqueduct finally reaches this area here. Now, there's a ridge, there's a mountain ridge right here. That's Jebel Mukaber, where the UN headquarters are, Armon HaNetziv. And this is a tunnel, that piece right there. If they hadn't made that tunnel, the aqueduct would have had to go around like this to get around the ridge. And it would have added this huge extra loop, would have added 3.5 kilometers to the length of the aqueduct. So that was not going to happen. The tunnel was excavated in the 1990s by Yaakov Bilig, and they discovered a fascinating thing. It had not 1, not 2, not 3, but 6 vertical shafts. I explain it like this. I don't know how long it actually took them to carve that tunnel. Let's say it would have taken 5 years. 5 years is a long time. If the manager of the aqueduct construction project was reporting to some pleasant guy like King Herod, if he didn't finish on schedule, they'd probably execute him. And he didn't want to spend 5 years carving a tunnel. So he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to speed things up. I'm going to dig shafts in the middle of the tunnel, vertical shafts. And from those vertical shafts, I can dig in two opposite directions. And that way I can have, well, if there's two crews, sorry, there were 5 shafts. If there were 2 crews from each shaft going opposite directions, plus 2 more crews, 1 on each end, I've got 12 crews working simultaneously. So instead of 5 years, it'll take me only 5 months. That's 12 times faster. That's pretty good. There's another big advantage to having all those shafts. You can reduce the possible error, the navigational errors. In other words, the different pieces are more likely to connect up the way they're supposed to. Now, as many of you probably know, I don't want to insult your intelligence, but you all know that there's the aqueduct map in the park opposite the Tayelet, and that aqueduct map made out of mosaic is centered around the middle of the shafts, or one of the shafts. A little bit uphill from that park, in the middle of a bunch of pine trees, there's another shaft, which is in the middle of an excavated area. I haven't been there in ages. I don't know if it's still accessible. I think it is. And there, what they apparently did is when they dug the vertical shaft, they cheated. Someone had a house there with a cistern, and they dug the shaft starting from the bottom of somebody's cistern. In other words, they made a hole in the guy's cistern. On the other hand, whoever's house it was could have lowered a bucket and scooped up water from the aqueduct when they finished. I don't think they asked permission. They just did it. By the way, this tunnel is 395 meters long, and there are now regular tours of that tunnel run by Irtavid. Let me see. Okay, and then the water the aqueduct continues toward the Temple Mount. But there's something really bizarre I need to tell you about. In the year 1901, the Turks decided that the rate of flow from the aqueduct was too slow. So they hired a Greek engineer, and they decided to the engineer decided to improve the aqueduct by running an iron pipe from Solomon's Pools all the way to here, to where this tunnel is, and then from there to go across down the valley and up the other side to the Temple Mount. Because they're using a metal pipe, they don't have to worry about going down and then up again. As long as you go up less than you went down, it all works out. But it wasn't working real well, and they decided that what they really needed to do was to take that tunnel and change it. So let me show you, go back to my PowerPoint, which is, I think that's it. So what they did was they took that tunnel, which originally looked like this, the dotted line area, and they dug a hole. They lowered the floor by, like, I don't know, 4 meters. And they basically turned the tunnel into a cistern. So the metal pipe would bring water from Solomon's Pools to this tunnel turned into a cistern, and the water would accumulate there. And they figured then, since there's a lot of water, then that could happen day and night, and then the water would flow more constantly down the valley and up the side through the metal pipe and be available in the old city and wherever they needed it. And now when you walk through this tunnel, the ceiling is very high because you're walking, because you're walking down here where the metal pipe was, way below the original floor of the aqueduct. The whole thing was a really stupid idea. It did not work very well. here's what Charles Warren wrote about it a year later in the Palestine Exploration Fund Quarterly Statement, 1902. He said, as far as I can judge from reports that have come to hand, there's been a most unnecessary and useless expenditure of money upon the water supply. The low-level aqueduct formerly supplied water to Birket es-Sultan, that's the Sultan's pool where there's a Sabil, a water fountain, and to Haram es-Sharif, the Temple Mount. This aqueduct might have been repaired at slight cost. There was no necessity to lay iron pipes uphill and down dale and to turn a tunnel into a reservoir to deliver water at the same place and at less pressure. Okay, the aqueduct continued after the tunnel. It looped around parallel to the Tayelet, and just below the St. Clair convent. If you're walking along the Tayelet, if you look to your right, you can see a whole long, as you pass go behind the convent, you can see a nice section of the aqueduct there. Then it goes up towards Mishkot Shananim. By the way, Mishkot Shananim, its level is 738 meters. So it started at 765. Now we're down to 738. We've got 3 meters to go, and we still have to make it to the Temple Mount. Now,
excuse me, Asher, can you put on the map again?
Sure. Thank you for telling me. There. 1 second. So we've gone through the tunnel, and I'm right now talking about this section right there, right where it says 42. And Mishkot Shananim is like here. Well, oops, wait 1 second. Every time I unshare and then share, I lose my pointer. There, we're talking about this section right here. Mishkot Shananim is like right there, to the left of the 42. Now, there's a beautiful section of the aqueduct that you all should know about. You can take tours to see it. It's really cool. It's right on the main, like the paved road that's below Mishkot Shananim, above Derech Hebron, and there's like a plaza, and you can see a beautiful section, perfectly preserved. You can see the speckles and the flat stones that covered it. It's very nice. Okay, now the aqueduct needs to get from here to the Temple Mount. The problem is there's this big valley here called the Hinnom Valley. Now, they could have gone across the valley in a straight line, and that would have made it shorter, but the valley is really deep. That would have been really hard to do. So instead, they decided, without losing too much distance, they could go around. So it continues north and then loops around to the south. Now, they didn't go, at some point in time, they had to cross the valley. It was, instead of crossing the valley here, like at 41, they crossed the valley north of 42. But how did it cross the valley? It crossed the valley in a bridge. The bridge had 9 arches. It cannot now not be seen at all. It was uncovered in 1898 approximately by Conrad Schick. He studied it, and he wrote in the Palestine Exploration Fund Quarterly Statement of 1898, he wrote this: 50 years ago, the wall, with the many arches bearing the pipes of the aqueduct coming from Solomon's pools and going to the temple area, was more than the height of a man, 13 feet high in the middle, and all the arches, 9 in number, were open. But now they are all shut up. The wall is only looking out a few feet above the ground. The next generation will no more understand how their fathers and grandfathers could hear speak of a bridge. So next time you go to Chutzot HaYotzer, know that right around there was this beautiful 9-arched bridge crossing the valley. And here, let me show you something else. Oops. There, can you see that? Can you see that diagram? Do you see this drawing? Yes, okay, good. Okay, so this is Conrad Schick's drawing. I think it's really cool. Okay, this is the road. This is the bridge at the bottom. This is the Sultan's Pool. Here he says, here there was water in February of 1897, where he says fountain. That's the Sabil, the Mameluke, sorry, the Ottoman water fountain. 1 second, let me get my pointer back. Where it says, that's the water. Where it says fountain, that's the Ottoman Sabil that was built by Suleiman in like 1520 or something. It was fed by a spur of the aqueduct. Here there is a, this is the line of the aqueduct coming in. And there was a spur, here he says it's even labeled a pipe for filling fountain. Oh, fount, abbreviated. And the bridge is off, wait, 1 second. Yeah, here, this is the bridge. This is the 9-arch bridge. So the aqueduct came like this to the north, crossed the valley, and comes down the other side of the road. And today, when you walk along this side of the road on Derech Hebron, walking up the hill towards the Jaffa Gate, you can see some sections of the aqueduct cut here. One other cool thing about this diagram is, if you look carefully right here, okay, this is the road. This is the road over the dam. Right there, there's a mosque. But apparently what happened is they widened the road at some point in time and completely obliterated the mosque. So there used to be a mosque right across the street from the Sabil. Anyway. Okay, we get past this area, we cross the Hinnom Valley, we loop around Mount Zion, and then we cross the edge of the Rova. Here's a picture of a section of the aqueduct that you used to be able to see going down the steps from the Rova toward the Kotel. I'm not sure you can still see it, but it used to be there. I also remember that there always used to be a smell of sewage right around this area. Here's a cross section showing what the speckles looked like. It originally looked like this, and then there was this clay pipe that was laid in the bottom in the 1500s, I believe. Now the aqueduct eventually makes its way across over Wilson's Arch onto the Temple Mount, and in the Temple Mount, very close to where Wilson's Arch is, there's this massive, massive cistern. In Arabic, it's called Bahr el-Kabir, which means the Great Sea. Here's a painting which gives you a feeling of how big that thing. And you can see there's no way this kind of thing could have been filled by rainwater. This was filled by an aqueduct system running 24 hours a day. Okay, the aqueduct, the question is, when exactly was it built? The bottom line is that we don't know exactly. It was certainly in use in the Second Temple period. It was certainly in use at the time of King Herod for lots of reasons I'll talk about later. But most scholars believe it was built in the Hashmona'i period. I think it was probably built by Alexander Yanai because he was a very aggressive guy. Shimon Gibson gives some background reasons. He says it almost certainly could not have been built until after the destruction of Acre fortress by Shimon HaMaccabee, and that was in 141. And because it was only after that the walls around to the west of Jerusalem were expanded. And anyway, it seems Alexander Yanai is a good candidate for who built it. Now, there's some really fascinating references to the aqueduct in the Talmud. I won't read through this, but basically the idea is that the rabbis knew about the aqueduct. Here it's really cool. It says, Abaye says that they knew that the spring, Ein Etam, is 23 cubits above the floor of the Beit HaMikdash. So as they understood this idea of water flowing downhill through an aqueduct, and they knew where it came from. In Rashi's commentary on this, he apparently had no idea where Ein Etam was. He didn't know that it was between Beit Lechem and Hebron, and he writes that he thinks it must be that spring called Mei Niftach, which is mentioned in Sefer Yehoshua. It shows that he was very smart, but didn't know the geography of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, that we have finished the most important and complicated aqueduct. I didn't finish. Okay, the lower aqueduct was destroyed in the year 70 at the time of the revolt, and that is reported in Midrash Rabbah on Echa. It specifically says the aqueduct that used to come from Etam, the Sikari came and destroyed it. So the zealots destroyed the aqueduct on purpose, just like they burned warehouses of food and so on. They destroyed the aqueduct on purpose to get people into the revolt. It's not known exactly when the lower aqueduct was repaired. Sometime after the destruction, the upper level aqueduct, which we'll talk about last, was built, and it replaced the lower aqueduct, but the upper aqueduct did not last very long. And when it came out of use, the lower aqueduct was again repaired. So it was abandoned probably for several hundred years. And it was probably in the Byzantine period that the lower aqueduct finally came back into use. And for example, there are enormous cisterns, which I'm sure you all know about, below the parking lot of the Rova, the cisterns of the Nea Church. They were probably filled with the water flowing through the lower aqueduct. And there really aren't any other options because the upper aqueduct was had long been out of use by the time of Justinian, who built the Nea Church. And it could even have been Justinian who refurbished the lower aqueduct, which hadn't been used for quite a while. Okay, now on to the next aqueduct. The Biar aqueduct, this one is short and easy to explain. This is an aqueduct which brings water from a spring, actually from 3 different springs, and it takes the water to the upper of the 3 Solomon's pools. It's only 4.7 kilometers long, but the straight line distance is only 4 kilometers. In other words, the aqueduct is almost perfectly straight. In a minute, I'll switch to the diagram and you'll see it again. And it takes the water from these 3 springs to the upper pool. But this is the coolest aqueduct of all. This aqueduct is not just an aqueduct. It was carefully designed to go along the seam between the aquifer and the aquiclude. The aquiclude is the layer, the impervious layer of rock that stops the water from percolating lower in the ground. So water actually flowed into the tunnel along its entire length. So the water that came out of the tunnel was 3 times more than what flowed in. Now, if that's not cool, I don't know what is. Most people believe this was built by King Herod, so it shows that King Herod has some pretty competent geologists on his staff. Now, today we call it Emek HaBe'erot, or Emek HaBots. As you can see in the photograph, the water is very muddy. You can still walk through it today, as you can see in the photograph. The reason it's called Emek HaBe'erot is because there's something like 80 shafts all along that were used for maintenance and to clean out the aqueduct, something that was very important. Next aqueduct. Oh, let me show you that on the diagram. Okay, the BR aqueduct starts, well, it takes water from two main springs. One is called Ein Vadi El BR, that's number 46. And there's another spring here called Ein Atzafir, and and they're both very close to El Azar. And here's Efrat right there. And the aqueduct, as I said, is only 4.7 kilometers. This goes from here to here. There's a pool right here where the water from these two springs is combined, and then it continues onward. And as you can see in this diagram, it's going to the upper of the three Solomon's pools. That's the BR aqueduct. The Arrub aqueduct. This is the one that we have the least specific information about. It is the longest by far. It's 39 kilometers long. The straight line distance would have been only 10 kilometers. In other words, it is the most tortuous aqueduct, which is a fancy way of saying it was twisty and turny. And it descended at a rate of only 0.9%, which is the least amount of slope. The water must have just barely flowed through that aqueduct. It used a variety of techniques to overcome a large number of geographic obstacles. There were places where it was just built on the ground or on top of a low wall. There were places where there are bridges. There are cases where there were tunnels. They had to use every trick in the book to get the water from these three springs all the way to the upper Solomon's pool. By the way, one of the springs is called En Huezeba, and I have seen in multiple sources it's called En Huzeba, and people try to connect it to Bar Kokhba, but apparently that's based on a corruption of the Arabic name, which is probably a corruption of something else. Let's see. This was excavated, or it was examined by Amichai Mazar. At one place he found 5 layers of plaster in the Spekus. The earliest one he said was early Roman. So who do we think built this aqueduct? Well, the answer is actually pretty clear. It was Pontius Pilate. First, here's a photograph. This is the pool that gathers the water from the spring. Here's the aqueduct coming in, and then from the pool, it continues onward downhill towards Solomon's pools, which are off in the distance in this photograph. Josephus in Antiquities tells the following story. But Pilate undertook to bring a current of water to Jerusalem, and he did it with the sacred money. In other words, he stole money from the treasury of the temple and derived the origin of the stream from a distance of 200 furlongs. He brought water from really far away. I have no idea how long a furlong is, but that's how long Josephus says this aqueduct was. But the Jews got really upset, and people got together and they protested and they had demonstrations and they shouted insults, and they really annoyed Pontius Pilate, who thought he was doing something for their own good. So he decided to use rather different methods that we use today to put down this rioting. So he had his soldiers dress up as Jews. He habited a great number of his soldiers in their habit. In other words, they had to disguise themselves as Jews, but they had swords underneath their clothes, and they all stood out on the street around Pontius Pilate's balcony, and there are all these Jews out there shouting insults and throwing rotten tomatoes, and then he just whistles, he goes, and all the soldiers take out their swords and start hacking away at the unarmed Jews around them, and as Josephus says, and thus an end was put to the sedition. Now the same story is told in wars, but there the length of the aqueduct is given as 400 furlongs. Anyway, I like reading this to the tourists. Farther along the BR aqueduct, at one point in time, they found an inscription in Greek. It's a Byzantine inscription that dates to the 6th century. Basically, what it says is, if you plant a field within 15 feet of this aqueduct, we do not trust you not to be tempted to make a hole, to make a deliberate leak in the aqueduct to water your field. And if you plant such a field, the penalty is death. And just so there should be no uncertainty about what we mean by 15 feet, wait, I need my pointer back. Just so there's no uncertainty about what we mean by 15 feet, if you look at the diagram, that's the definition of a foot. It's right there, the length of that line. And if you don't like this translation here, you can read it in the original Greek, if this is too hard to read. Okay, that's the BR aqueduct. Now, third aqueduct. Oh, sorry, that was the third aqueduct. That was the Arrub aqueduct. Okay, so I told this story about the rioting of the Jews who were very annoyed at Pontius Pilate. Shimon Gibson points out a very interesting thing. He says, it's not really obvious why the Jews were so pissed off, because after all, the aqueduct was really for their own good. And Pontius Pilate speculates that, Shimon Gibson speculates that Pontius Pilate might have used the money also for the upper level aqueduct, which we're going to talk about next and last. And that upper level aqueduct was specifically benefited the soldiers who were stationed near the Jaffa Gate in the upper parts of the city. And maybe that's what annoyed the Jews. It's not really clear. Shimon has a good point here. The upper level aqueduct. The upper level aqueduct brings water from the upper pool to the area of today's Jaffa Gate. This is the second to the two aqueducts that brings water from Solomon's pools to the city. It was a much shorter than lower level aqueduct, which is a way of saying it was a more high-tech aqueduct. Instead of, remember the other aqueduct was 21 kilometers long, this one is only 7. It's only 14. It's 7 kilometers shorter than the lower level aqueduct. The lower level aqueduct, remember, it only covered 10 kilometers, but it took 21. So the upper aqueduct is only 9.4 kilometers straight line distance. So it was pretty amazing. Now, how did they save all that distance? Well, the main thing they did is they used a trick, a high-tech method called an inverted siphon. Some people call it just a siphon. It's really not a siphon at all. It really is just a pipe that goes down one side of a valley and up the other side. Now, the alternative, if you don't want to do all this stuff here, which I'll explain in a second, you could just build a bridge across the valley. But in this particular case, this valley, which is just to the west of Beit Lechem, is 40 meters. 40 meters is a pretty high bridge. So it would have been very difficult. I mean, it wasn't impossible, but it would have been really difficult. So it goes like this. You build a pipe, and it has to be a pipe. It can't just be an open trench with the specus like we talked about before. It has to be a closed, airtight pipe, a watertight pipe. And there's a column of water going downhill, and gravity is pulling this water down. It goes across the bottom, and then what pushes it up the other side? Well, the force of gravity pulling down here pushes it up. Now, the force of gravity going down needs to be more than the force of gravity pulling against you on the upside, and that is arranged by having the upside be shorter. In other words, see, there's this difference in height. Here it's called the hydraulic gradient, so that the receiving end is a little bit lower than the beginning end, and that height differential allows the water to come in on this side and come out on that side, all thanks to gravity. Now, the pipe, as I said, needs to be watertight, but not only does it have to be watertight, but it has to be really strong. It can't just be made out of clay, because the clay pipe would just burst. I mean, we suffer with burst pipes in our apartments, and they're made out of plastic or metal, but they don't have to support this 40-meter high column of water. on both sides. So the pressure at the bottom of that thing, the pressure down here, this part of the pipe is enormous. Anyway, so they had interlocking stone segments with a clay pipe inside of them. And that's how they built the inverted siphon. Here's a photograph of what it looked like. And here's wait, I thought I'm missing a photograph. I thought I had a photograph of a close-up of one of the stone flanges. And the stone flanges actually had inscriptions that were the names of commanders in the Roman 10th Legion. And we can identify some of the names. And that gives you a hint that this part of the aqueduct, or maybe the whole upper aqueduct, was built by the 10th Legion. Now, I'll discuss the dating in a moment, but first let's finish discussing the course of the upper aqueduct. Back to the diagram. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, the upper aqueduct is this dotted line. As I already said, it starts from the upper of the three pools. Here it is. This is where the inverted siphon is. This is a stone pipe right to the west of Beit Lechem. And that's a shorter method than going off this way and through a tunnel. It continues straight this way. It goes to the west of Mar Elias across Ivan Amatos. And you can see a stretch of the upper aqueduct there. It goes parallel to Derech Hebron. And in this section here, there was an excavation by Yaakov Bilig in the, I think it was in the 90s. I remember going there in person and looking at it. He found a 300-meter long section of the upper aqueduct. It's right, by the way, it's right next to the Kathisma Church. So if you know where that is, you know where the upper aqueduct was. In that particular area, the aqueduct was built on top of a wall. In other words, in order to get at the right level, they had to raise it somewhat on a wall. Now, that piece of the aqueduct had built on top of it a building that dated to the Byzantine period. In other words, the upper aqueduct, we know for sure, based on Yaakov Bilig's excavation, was definitely not in use in the Byzantine period. It might have been built by the Roman 10th Legion, but it didn't last more than say 200-300 years, maybe less. Now, they also, by the way, there were multiple lines of aqueduct here. It wasn't just one. It had been built and repaired. At one point, they found, right in this excavation here, when they tore down part of the aqueduct, they found in the base, underneath the speckles, they found a coin. The coin was issued by Agrippa I, who, as you know, lived after King Herod. It's Herod's grandson. And this is shocking because that means that the aqueduct could not have been built by King Herod. It could not have been built probably until after the destruction. And there are those people who were shocked by this because they wanted to say that no, the aqueduct was not built by the 10th Legion, it was built by King Herod. And this coin seems to prove that no, it was really and truly built by the 10th Legion. However, a lot of study and a lot of analysis has concluded that although this particular section of the aqueduct might have been built later, and maybe this section, including the stone pipe, might have been built by the time after the destruction by the 10th Legion. The aqueduct as a whole was earlier and really and truly was built in the time of King Herod. How do we know? Well, I talked about this stone pipe here, the inverted siphon, and how the alternative to a inverted siphon would be to build a huge bridge that was 40 meters high across the valley. David Amitz, Zichrono Livracha, did an excavation here, and he found 12 pieces of what do you call it, columns that would have supported a bridge. So apparently there was at some point in time a bridge that went across this valley that was 40 meters high. And that bridge might have dated to the time of King Herod. That's what David Amitz dated it to based on his archaeological finds. And the inverted siphon might have been built later in the time of the Romans, perhaps as a repair to the bridge, which might have gotten broken down during the Great Revolt. I think that's probably the thing. And that the fact that there was a coin found along here that was before the time of the 10th Legion just means that a coin that was from the time of King Herod almost, King Herod's grandson, shows that this section of the aqueduct was not built at the same time as the rest of the aqueduct, which is totally unsurprising. We know it was built, different sections were built and rebuilt at different times. Now, let's continue the upper aqueduct. It goes parallel to Derech Hebron, and it goes across here. There are various bits and pieces of the upper aqueduct that you can see. My favorite spot is right around here. I guess it's number 59. This is across from Mishkanot Shenananim, right across from the windmill to the west of the windmill. In the grassy area there, I'll stick with that. In the grassy area to the west and a little bit north of the windmill, just a little bit, there's a big outdoor pool there next to the restrooms. Anyway, in the middle of the grass there's a staircase, a stone staircase that goes down to a tunnel carved through the rock. And the other end of the tunnel can be seen just a little bit to the south on the other side of the access road to the Mishkanot Shenananim parking lot. And there's even an inscription, a modern English inscription there that says, this is a piece of the upper aqueduct. Anyway, the aqueduct continues all the way up, and according to most people, they believe it actually flowed into the Mila pool, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Now, from the Mila pool, it flowed via a separate aqueduct into the old city, under the Jaffa Gate, into what we call Hezekiah's pool. Now, this aqueduct was used for many years beyond when the upper aqueduct fell out of use. What probably happened was, after I said before, it wasn't more than 200 or 300 years, probably the stone pipe here, because of the pressure, it gave way, sprung a leak, and no one was going to bother fixing it. It was less work to rebuild the whole lower aqueduct instead. It meant that the water would not end up this high in the city. It ended up on Arbit. But if we're talking about Muslim periods, that was the most important part of town for them. The water came out next to the mosque, next to the Dome of the Rock, next to El Aqsa Mosque. And anyway, so when the upper aqueduct stopped being used and was replaced by the repaired lower aqueduct, this piece of it continued to be used because the Mamila pool was filled not just by water from the now no longer functioning upper aqueduct, it's also gathering rainwater from a large area. And that all that area drains the Mamila pool, and it goes through this aqueduct, which when they did excavations along Rehov Mamila, and I remember again going there in person and taking pictures, of the section of aqueduct. I might have a picture of it. Let me see. Well, here's a diagram of it. Here you see, here you see the Mamila pool and the aqueduct going along Rehov Mamila through the Jaffa Gate and into Hezekiah's pool, which of course has nothing whatsoever to do with Hezekiah. It's Josephus calls it the pool of the towers, the Amygdalin pool. Let me see. Now, I think it is logical. I think there's no alternative but to conclude that the upper aqueduct was in fact built originally in the time of King Herod and was then modified and refurbished by the 10th Legion. Because if you say that the upper aqueduct was not built until after the Churban, until after the death of King Herod, then how exactly do you explain what happened in King Herod's palace, which was here? By the way, that's where the tunnel goes under the Jaffa Gate. Josephus writes about the palace. There were groves of various trees intersected by long walks, which were bordered by deep canals and ponds everywhere, studded with bronze statues through which the water was discharged. So, like, this is like big time water. Like, this is not cisterns. This is water. This is flowing water. I conclude from this, the upper aqueduct had to be functional in the time of King Herod. And this still fits in, by the way, with King Herod being the guy who built the BR aqueduct that brought water to the upper of the three Solomon's pools, and that's what fed the upper aqueduct. So it all sort of fits together. It was part of this huge, we talk about the huge projects that King Herod did. You know, he built the road, he expanded the Temple Mount, he rebuilt the temple, but he also apparently refurbished the aqueduct system specifically to support his palace. By the way, as you all know, King Herod also had various other palaces besides the one near today's Jaffa Gate. For example, he had his palace at Herodian, and there was a branch of the aqueduct that led all the way out to Herodian, which you can see on the diagram. We'll come back to that in a while. The upper aqueduct, wait 1 second. Right. In the British Weekly, the Sunday Telegraph, in the edition of February 18th, 1996, we have the following item, that just days after Israel handed over Beit Lechem to the Palestinians, what was left of the stone pipe was bulldozed by unknown Palestinians because it was prime real estate and they wanted to build some commercial buildings. And the director of the Israel Museum, who was then Magen Broshi, was quoted as saying that this aqueduct was part of the heyday of Jewish existence, the most important relic since the time of Jesus Christ, which is a nice thing for a Jewish guy to say. And that was the end of the stone pipe. I think I have like one more slide. Oh, there's that quote. And here's an interesting quote from Josephus about the aqueduct to Herodian. He describes Herodian in general terms, but look at the end. You know that below Herodian there was this gigantic swimming pool. Like, where did that water come from? It came from an aqueduct. About the bottom, there are habitations of such a structure as are well worth seeing, even today, both on other accounts, but also on account of the water which is brought thither from a great way off, and at vast expense, for the place itself is destitute of water. Okay, let me show you that on the diagram. And then we will open it up for questions. 1 second. And the 6 times I keep forgetting how to do this. Oops. There you see it. That this dotted line goes all the way out to Herodian. Isn't that cool? Now you can see bits and pieces of it, but it hasn't been mapped as thoroughly as the other aqueducts. I guess people were less interested in Herodian than they were interested in Jerusalem. Oh, one little cute little tidbit before I look at all the accumulated comments and questions. Notice this is the Arrub aqueduct, the really long winding one. Okay, over this valley here, right around 20, it crossed a wadi in a bridge. And look at the name of the wadi. It's called Wadi El Jisr, which, as I'm sure you know, Jisr is Gesher, is bridge in Arabic. So it's called, to this very day, Wadi El Jisr because of the fact that maybe Pontius Pilate built a bridge over the wadi to bring water to Solomon's pools. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the chat. And Judy, you're welcome to open it up to people or to let people unmute themselves. Oh gosh. I'm not going to be able to say this all. Okay, so I will share my, okay, I'm going to go through in order. I will, okay, Tzvi asked about where the article is, which the David Amit and Shimon Gibson article. I will, I'll send out my slides, my PowerPoint presentation with a specific reference to the article, and you can all get downloaded for free from internet. Okay, Gil Peretz said it was not percent pro mil, and he's absolutely correct. I was wrong. I meant to say pro mil, which is 0.1%. Okay, how do they figure out, okay, Daniel Selig says, how do they figure out that the water source is higher than the destination point? And right. If you go to the park opposite Tayelet, where they have the mosaic map, on one side of the mosaic map, they have pictures or they have diagrams of some of the kinds of surveying tools that were used in Roman times that were used to measure heights or measure angles over long distances. There's one tool called a geolite or something that they still, basically what it is it's imagine a plank of wood that's perfectly straight and perfectly flat, and you have a small crack in it with a nagid, a bubble of mercury, and so it's like it's basically a level. So if you tilt it, the mercury goes to one end to the other, and if you have it exactly straight, then you can take a sighting along it, and you could measure your exact height on the other side of the valley, that kind of thing. That's a very vague answer to the question about how they measured the thing. They had tools they could do that. Okay, so he also asked, what's the population at the end of the Second Temple at Jerusalem as being? I don't have a clue, and in my opinion, anyone who says they know is making it up. There were a lot of people. And also the population is not what matters. What matters is how many people showed up for the Shalosh Regalim. And I don't know how many people that is. Josephus is probably exaggerating, but maybe not, who knows. Okay, Judy asked, Brechot Shlomo, maybe they started out Hashmonean, they were probably mostly King Herod. Because they were built and repaired so many times, it's really hard to know who was first. Suleiman the Magnificent. Did I say something else? Maybe I said Suleiman the Great. Whatever. Let me see. Oh, Judy, you asked if I could explain the part about Birkat Sultan. Which part was that?
Actually, just read the next question again. Read the next question.
Oh, can you explain why the Turks thought it was a good idea to lay metal pipes? Okay, probably what happened is the aqueduct probably the lower aqueduct probably either stopped working entirely or the flow of water was really, really slow. You know, it was only giving them, 50 liters a day or something, which was totally insufficient. So they hired some engineer who said, well, lay a pipe, it'll work better. He was wrong. So there isn't really a good reason, except it was the opinion of this Greek engineer. And it was a bad idea, and everyone suffered. Basically, after 1901, the aqueduct barely functioned at all. I mean,
when was that? When was that iron pipe?
1901.
1901. Okay.
And I mean, it did function for a while longer, but it frequently came out of use because there were people would make holes in the pipe and stuff like that. Okay, I think I showed the diagram at where it crossed the Sultan's Pool. It did actually cross this is Daniel Sella's question. The lower aqueduct crossed Geben Hinnom just to the north end of the Sultan's Pool. I didn't explain this, but Conrad Schick, who did some digging there, discovered that there were actually two. The Sultan's Pool actually had two parts. There was an upper pool and a lower pool. Nowadays, the upper pool is completely gone. Basically, it's been filled by accumulated silt. But anyway, the aqueduct crossed to the north of the upper pool.
Is that where the Turkish bridge was discovered with the 9 arches, more or less?
Yes, that was it.
I mean, that stuff is still visible somewhat. They made that visible again in the excavations in Park Teddy. There's something there to see.
Can you see any of the arches? I mean, they're probably below
There's
ground.
something I don't remember exactly, but there's something restored there.
We'll have to check it out. I when I was last at Teddy Fountain, I wasn't looking for the aqueduct. But I'll tell you, I often, when I walk along there below Mishkan Shanim, I often try to look and figure out where exactly it was. And I was never really able to know exactly.
And then it ran basically below the city wall, somewhere like around Hartzion.
Okay.
The lower aqueduct.
Here, let me show you the diagram. Well, here, let me show you Conrad Schick's diagram.
Like the map that you had wasn't so clear in terms of today's coordinates. Schick's picture, unless.
Hang on. Here, I'll show you one. Conrad Schick's diagram.
I know he was a landsman of mine, but that doesn't make it easier for me to understand him.
Wait, he was a Yeki, right?
Yes, he was a Yeki. He's from Württemberg and Basel.
This is a great diagram. Where is it? Okay, here it says Maskeret Yehudit. Okay, that's part of Mishkan Shananim. And the aqueduct, wait, hold it. You can't see my pointer.
Where are the city walls on this picture? Like, they're not on there, right? They're like
the city wall is below, is down, it's below. It's off the diagram below. This is where it says Church Road. That's the road going up towards Shar Yafo. So Shar Yafo is up the hill that way.
Wait, I didn't see. Where's Shar Yafo? Oh, we got it.
Shar Yafo is off to the right. This is the bridge. This is the bridge. Okay, so Mishkan Shananim is over there. This is the bridge at the southern end of. Is it the southern end? Yeah, at the southern end of the Sultan's Pool.
Will we drive over today?
That you drive over today? Yeah, you drive right here, and this bill, Ottoman Sabil built in the 1500s is right to the side that you pass it every time you drive by there.
Yeah. This is a building where you're with the red dot. Right.
Right. Exactly. That's what Sabil is. So anyway, so the city walls, the Suleiman's walls are up here.
Right. And where? And again, show with the cursor. Where do you think the aqueduct crossed? Much further to the left.
He shows it here exactly. This is the aqueduct.
Uh-huh. Right.
Like this,
Uh-huh.
and then like this. It makes a U. It's going around. That's how you go around a valley.
Right. Yeah. Okay, got it.
And then now here it loops is where it loops around Hartzion.
I see. Thank you very much. I just understand that the directions of the picture weren't clear to me. Okay, I got it.
It's not. No, he says north. north is to the right. That's why it's confusing.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at a smartphone, so it's very small. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's well, no, and this is an enlargement. And you know that when you drive on Kfish Apifior around up Hartzion, so you can see a section of the lower aqueduct, but what you're seeing is not really in place. The supporting wall and the trench, the whole thing collapsed and fell down like, I don't know, 20 meters, and it's now lower than it ever was before.
Mm-hmm. Right. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, let me see. What else? Okay. I really apologize. Oh, a theodolite. Thank you. That's what the tool is called. I apologize for not having any current pictures of the thing near Mishkot Shananim, but if you just walk along the road there below Mishkot Shananim, you'll see it right opposite the entrance, the original entrance to Mishkot Shananim from below. Thank you very much for listening. If there are any other questions, if not, Chodesh Tov. Enjoy returning to normality, sort of.
Asher, thank you very, very much. This is
Very
fabulous.
nice.
It was really great.
Okay.
Nice.
Thank you all.
Another great Asher Arbit product. Excellent.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much.
Thanks,
You're
Asher.
welcome.
All right, guys, join us tomorrow. We have another Asher tomorrow.
Asher
And,
Archel.
That's right.
Asher.
Okay,
Yeah. I
see
taught
you
him
guys
everything he
tomorrow
knows.
at
Kidding.
12 o'clock.
Definitely not.
Okay.
He's a great.
Chodesh
I
Tov.
recommend listening to Asher in every opportunity. Asher Archel is very, very good. Don't miss him.
I think our group is
Thanks,
great.
Asher.
Bye.
Okay, and if anybody would like to present something, just be in touch with me. Okay, big or small, whatever. We'd love to have
For
you.
all the technologically challenged, Barnea put something onto the email today. I just started reading it and it's like, whoa, amazing how he did that. How am I ever going to do that? I'm telling you. Anyway,
All right, everybody, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Chodesh Tov. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Asher.
you.